Steve here. The short-term rental market is hot. Digital nomads and the ability to work from anywhere has made them more popular than ever. People are looking for a place to bug out to, a place to get away from the hustle and bustle of the big city. I'm building a short-term rental village, and today I want to share with you my feelings on some of these really neat short-term rental structures. Before I get too far into it, I really want your input. So start a conversation in the comments. Let me know about your experiences or opinions on what kind of structures work well for short-term rentals. Domes, container homes, tree houses, they're all the rage. Are they a good idea? In the spirit of positivity, let's talk about the pros of some of these alternative structures first. Number one, inexpensive. These structures can be put up in a fraction of the time of a permanent structure. Many of them don't require plans, permits, or even inspections. A lot of times, without an HVAC system, running water, bathrooms, plumbing, electric, all the things that you get in a permanent structure, these can be put up in very little time. They can often be permitted if permitting is required as an ADU or an accessory dwelling unit, which may not require all the hoops to jump through. Number two, these buildings can be put up quick. A lot of the same things that make them inexpensive also make them quick to build. When I built the house that I live in now, I had almost 50% of what it took to build this house in the foundation and excavating. I would joke that I was out of money and we'd have to turn it into the world's most expensive swimming pool. Number three, I'm not sure why I'm even numbering these because they're all kind of similar wrapped in together. We could just kind of talk about the positive points. If you live in an area where I do, I'm on 10 acres, I have a permanent house here, obviously. You are not able to build another permanent structure, but an ADU or something that's temporary may not be a problem at all. If you wanted to put a Airstream camper in the backyard, that may be something that's permittable or doesn't require a permit. I don't think when I built here that there was a permit for teepee in the backyard. So I'm pretty sure you could get away with that. You may run into some liability issues with renting it, insurance concerns, things like that, but it may be something that's a lot easier to get done than building another permanent structure. Number four, high short-term ROI. Yes, we're still doing the number thing. Because these are less expensive and quick to build, you can start renting them quicker. A lot of times I've seen these units rent for as much as a permanent structure, and if you get it done 6 months faster, you could pay for it before a permanent structure would even be rented for the first time. The fifth thing is the wow factor. It's no secret that creative, unique units rent well in the short-term market. Some of these short-term units, some of these temporary structures, I call them, are unique. They're really cool. They're very versatile. They rent well and they rent for a lot of money. It's definitely something to think about. Okay, so now on the flip side, I want to look at the cons. The first con, and this is the biggest one as I see it, is that these structures are not permanent. And I know a lot of you will say, well, a shipping container home is made out of steel and concrete, and that's true. Those last a long time. But the things it takes to build a shipping container home that is climate controlled, that is moisture tolerant, that has all of the right things to make it last long and be comfortable without molding, without the interior finishes falling apart, makes it take as long as a permanent home. So if you're gonna go that route, then you have a whole world of options, and this short-term kind of temporary quick build and rent idea of a shipping container home kind of goes in the toilet. But let's think about some of these dome houses, safari tents, teepees, things like that. And I know that people are not saying those are permanent structures. I think people expect them to be temporary, but it's something that you need to take a look at. I have always thought that when you put like a dome outside and people say, ah, this is a rental, it gets a ton of money, and it probably does, but they sort of make it sound like, boy, if you do that for the next 20 years, I'll be able to retire. It's sort of like if you ever watched some of these earlier home and garden television shows where they do, you know, this big outside transformation. A whole crew would come in, they'd redo the landscaping, the deck, redo the outside of the house. They'd wind up making planter boxes out of, you know, plywood. They'd put cushions and curtains outside and things like that. I even saw them take a pair of cowboy boots and fill them with dirt and put plants in them. They look really neat, but how long does that stuff last? If you have a short-term rental property that's wooded like mine, boy, I live in the woods. I can tell you what the woods do to fabric outside, outdoor curtains, cushions, things like that. And if you don't have a property manager or someone that lives on your property to take them in and out or wash them every time it rains, those things just turn into a muddy mess on your deck. Number 2, I don't think they're quite as inexpensive as people think. Some of these tents, domes, things like that are very costly. If you add in what it costs to replace them every 5 or 6 years, at least to replace the skin on some of these domes, that cost starts to add up. If you factor in the cleaning costs to clean them, if you have more than one, or like me, you live 500 miles away, you can't just drive there and clean them every month. So some of that adds to how much they can get rented for. And I know we see a lot of these beautiful pictures of all these structures that just look fabulous, but they're brand new, every one of them. You've got bright white canvas in the woods that looks gorgeous, makes for great Instagram pictures, but what do you think that looks like in 2 years after it's been rained and snowed on and all the trees and dirt and pollen and things like that from the woods get put all over the thing? I bet they start to stain and look pretty much black. Number 3 is these structures most likely will shorten the season you can rent them for. There are few states in the US where they can be rented year-round without some sort of heat and AC. And in a structure that's not insulated and is thinly, I don't want to say poorly constructed, but compared to a permanent structure, they're going to be very hard to heat and cool, and it may shorten your season. Now, if you're in an area where maybe the season is shortened anyways, if you have winter and it's an area where people like to go hiking and there's not as many who want to do that in the winter, maybe it's not a concern, you'd shut it down anyways, and this is a great option. Number 4 is weak structures. And I know there's metal frames for a lot of these domes, things like that. A lot of them are hard shells, but I would be concerned to have some of those in the woods where a tree might fall on them. Are they gonna survive the blow? In this office that I'm filming this video in right now, I had a tree branch fall out of one of the tall oaks. That's about 100 feet up. That branch went through the roof, through the plywood, through the insulation, and poked through the ceiling in what would have been on top of my head as I sit here talking to you. I'd hate to see what would have happened if that was a canvas dome and somebody were in there sleeping. Even if you're not in the woods and tree branches or things falling from the sky are not a concern, well, maybe it is. What about rain? What about a monsoon rainstorm or wind? Things like that have a big effect on some of those structures that might make it more uncomfortable for your guests to stay there. And even if you don't think it's a problem, and maybe it's not, a lot of them will. We've been through several campers, and my family really enjoys camping. When I go out and stay at a campground with my family, we all would rather have a hard shell camper with insulation in the walls than some of these pop-ups or fold-outs that have canvas sides. Those are very popular, you see a ton of them, but if you're in a loud campground, if you have a property for some of these temporary structures where they're close to other people doing things, or a highway or anything like that, they're not very soundproof. So you'll have a lot of noise from the outside that makes its way in. Also something to think about. My 5th con on some of these temporary structures is the equity it builds, or rather lack of, for your property. If you have a property with multiple permanent structures on it, and you ever decide that you want to sell it, whether you're going to retire, move, it isn't for you, or you just want to cash in on it, there is a lot more to be had off of a permanent structure than there is something that's land with a bunch of tents on it. So if you're looking for a long-term investment, I think something with a long-term structure is the way to go. So what's my choice, you might ask? Or probably you wouldn't, but I'm going to ask for you. I choose a permanent structure. Something that will build equity for my property and be safer and more comfortable for my guests. I want the option to climate control and extend my season, I think this is the right choice for me. I do think this can be done in a way that capitalizes on some of the advantages of these temporary structures. I definitely think it's important to build something with that wow factor and something unique. It takes creativity to make a structure that is permanent and long-lasting, but different from all of the rest. That's what I'm going for. I do intend to listen to my audience though. And I don't mean you guys, although I do intend to listen to you too. But I mean my customers, the people that come and stay at them. And if I find out, being in Kentucky, it does have winter, that there's no attraction for the 3 coldest months out of the year for people to be there, then maybe adding heat and air and insulation to all of my units is money poorly spent. Maybe we want to try something that is a little less permanent. The best part about building structure in that fashion is that if you decide to add some of these comforts, some of the climate control, some of the things that make them stand apart from the temporary ones, you can add it in later much easier. I do also like the idea of building something from scratch and not buying something prefab. It allows me the opportunity to express my creativity, but it also ensures that what I build will be different from what anybody else can build. Rather than something that a number of people bought out of a box, you'd be more likely to have people return back because they couldn't find the same thing in a different location. At the very least, you will provide a totally unique experience for your guests, and no one can call you unoriginal. So what do you think? I've been wrong before.